the feminine myth, in turn, while it has probably, let's say, cosmogonic and spiritual aspects as well. In spite of my great devotion to depth psychology and things of that sort, I am not one of those people who reduces these fabulous myths to mere psychology. But I feel that they are also present at the psychological level, and then they are present at various other levels. But one of the metaphors which you find represented, I can't go into those details now, in the ways in which the Gnostics interpreted the myth of Genesis. Now, for instance, I'm quoting it from memory. In the Gospel of Philip, there is a mysterious saying referring to Genesis where it says, if the woman and the man had not separated in the beginning, then everything would be different. Then the soul could still have a relationship with, and we could still have a relationship with the divine. But that separation became the beginning of the fall. So that the beginning of the fall, which in Orthodox Christianity and Judaism is the transgression against the commandment, don't eat of the fruit of the tree, here is that the two have been separated. And the remedy for that is to bring the masculine and the feminine together again, then they can be in the fullness again. And how is this interpreted? It's usually interpreted is that the psyche, in this case, the mind with the ego, is Adam, and the pneuma, the spirit, is Eve. So the soul has become separated from the spirit. The mind is on his own, the Buddhists would say. And that's a terrible thing. Because the man without the point of contact, the mind without the point of contact with transcendence is capable of all kinds of balderdash. It churns out all kinds of unreality and misery and horror. It just keeps going. It keeps running. We all have it. It's truly astonishing in its weirdness, and ultimately in its counterproductive qualities. But the spirit, in turn, the feminine, in this case, pneuma, that is the point of contact with transcendence. And now that's important to remember. You will recall a little earlier what I said about the secular bias of our culture. The danger regarding Gnosticism, and for that matter Buddhism, and various other esoteric disciplines, Kabbalah and so forth, these esoteric disciplines run the danger at the present time that people will mistake their image of reality as some kind of a secularistic metaphor. And they will say, it's all in me. God is in me. This is where it is. Now the Kabbalah, the Gnostic teachings, the Tibetan Buddhists say, yes, you have a Buddha nature, yes. The Hindus will say, yes, you have an Atman, but you know what? That is only the point of contact, that is the opening to the greater. If you have access to the spark within you, then you can have contact with the great fire above. But there is a fire above. And there is a wonderful Buddhist, one of the sutras which I don't have with me now, where the Lord Buddha says, if it weren't for that unformed, uncreated, totally transcendent, there would be no reason for the created and for all of this here. In other words, our existence is justified and reified by transcendence. Existence finds its fulfillment in transcendence. And if there is no transcendence, then existence is worthless. It has absolutely no point. If there is no transcendence, that's the greatest argument for doing away with yourself. Whichever your preferred method, But this is how the secular mind, the materialistic mind, will twist genuine spirituality to its own liking and say, oh yes, it's wonderful, it's all in me, I create my own reality, I am my own God, yes, I can go down on my knee and worship myself. For God's sake, what incredible, abominable foolishness, what perversion of all the traditions, and yet it's all around. You can go into the Bodhi Tree bookshop, you can go into the various centers of the New Age, and to a major extent, unfortunately, regrettably, that is precisely what is going on. Well, hopefully it's in many cases just a passing phenomenon. Because eventually people grow out of that, because they find out, they look in the mirror and say, is this really worth worshipping? Especially as they get older. When you're 18 years old and you really look good, and there are various people around who think you look really good, you say, well, maybe I'm worth worshipping. Myself, why shouldn't these other gals and guys, worship me? That's really nice. I mean, it feels good and all that. But as the lines grow bigger, as the jowl gets longer, as the musculature doesn't hold up things very well anymore, and say, you know what? I don't think this is worth worshipping. I think I better start worshipping something better and something more beautiful. But all levity of that sort aside, I sort of have to conclude on that keynote. What this means is that the two have to come together. They have to come together not just to have a good time, which is worthwhile in itself, and even less in order to produce more offspring, more slaves for the demiurge, and all that, more soldiers to be blown up at some battlefield, more people to become homeless and everything else. You got to look at that, But the two must come together, because when the psyche and the pneuma, the mind and the spirit come together again, then the door is open to transcendence. So the loss of the feminine equals the loss of the spirit. This is explicit in the Gnostic scriptures. Or metaphorically, the masculine and the masculine is separated from the feminine. Look at the 22nd logion in the Gospel of Thomas. Jesus saw children who were being suckled. He said to his disciples, these children who are being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. They said to him, shall we then, being children, enter the kingdom? Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, and when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male and the female not be female, when you make eyes in the place of an eye, and the hand in the place of a hand, and the foot in the place of a foot, and an image in the place of an image, then shall you enter the kingdom. So this, why has he come? In another place he says that in order to help to make the two into a one again, to re-establish that connection, so that the primeval split between the feminine and the masculine, which has banished the feminine and got it out of its sight. Even as in society, so often the feminine is banished, because that is where the metaphor is lived out, But that is not the primary focus. Injustices exist and imbalances in societies exist because injustices and imbalances exist in the psyche and in the mind. And that's the only way that they're going to be remedied, because as long as the imbalances exist in the mind, they will again and again come forth and create imbalances and injustices and cruelty and oppression and repression outward in society. How many revolutions, how many wars, how many uprisings, how many regicides have there been in the history of the world? Millions, probably. Have they done away with injustice? Have they done away with inequity? Have they done away with evil? No. Why? Because they have not tackled these problems at the level of the soul, at the level of the mind. And when you only tackle them outwardly, these things come up right away, very, very quickly. No sooner does a revolutionary group take over and wipes out the previous government, they become the oppressors. And since they haven't been at it very long, they're usually very effective at it, much more effective perhaps than the previous ones. You see, that is how it goes. And so we need to keep in mind that we are dealing here with a great and tremendously important psycho-spiritual metaphor, a psycho-spiritual symbol. But that symbol is incredibly important because it is the cipher to reality. It is the door that opens into another dimension. It is much more important than anything else. If we still have the view that a symbol, that a myth, that a metaphor is something unreal, well, then we are still in tremendous trouble. But if we begin to recognize its reality and start working on that, then all kinds of marvelous and tremendously important developments may take place. And so the Gnostic view of the feminine is a very spiritual one. It is not primarily a sexual one, it is not primarily a physical one, it isn't even primarily a psychological one, but it is a spiritual one. Because it is at that spiritual point that the trouble exists. Because our linkage with transcendence by way of the spirit has become, well, if not entirely broken, then at least covered up to a great extent. And when that linkage is again established, then everything is different. Not only different, but better. And incidentally, for the benefit of my friends who are interested in those things, I think Jung was absolutely correct when he said that alchemy was a direct manifestation of this. That once the Gnostics weren't there any longer as religious teachers, the Gnostic practice has been turned into alchemy, because what is the rationale of alchemy? But again, to bring about a condition where the two come up and then conjoin with each other and eventually unite. And then the new great mystery, the philosopher's stone, comes into existence. And so, no doubt, the physically and psychically feminine points to the spiritual feminine, and beyond that to the divine feminine. In contrast to late 20th century and postmodern and modern thought, which points away from the spiritual, which identifies the feminine with breasts, with womb and vagina, the Gnostic view points toward the spiritual. A significant difference indeed. Goethe said it well in that famous, mysterious, very last verse, very last stanza of the Faust. All things transitory, but as symbols are meant. That which was forgotten here grows to event. The indescribable, here it is done. The eternal feminine draws us onward and on. But it is the eternal. It is the spiritual, of which all the other manifestations are the metaphors. But you see, just as the Gnostic said that the linkage between psyche and spirit was broken, so the linkage in our view very often, or almost inevitably, between metaphor, between symbol and the transcendental reality is also broken, and therefore we do not understand. So, I think the Gnostic view of the deific feminine has something to offer to the cultural ferment that engages itself on these issues. I do not deny that there are other issues and other problems. But we have a contribution. We have inherited a tradition that has a very important and a very unique contribution to make to this field. And those of us who represent this tradition are determined to do so. As we have done in the past, we shall do now. And we offer it to those who are interested in it, and perhaps by way of making that contribution, we will enrich and transform, and eventually, perhaps like our Lord the Christ has done, and as he stated in the Gospel of Thomas, we will contribute to make the two into one once again. May indeed that day and that hour come soon. Thank you.